Obviously, insecticides represent the chemical control tactic in our IPM framework. They are the most commonly used management tool, yet many landscape managers don't fully understand the chemical categories, modes of action, and other attributes that are essential for maximizing the pesticide's efficacy, yet reducing their cost, environmental impacts, and use. Chemicals that have insecticidal or mitocidal properties include some earth minerals and elemental chemicals. When these don't contain carbon as their main molecule, they are called inorganic. Since ancient times, powdered sulfur has been used as a miticide, insecticide, and fungicide. Mercury chloride, various arsenics, and lead compounds have insecticidal properties, but we know these have adverse effects on other animals, including us. We know that Egyptians and other Middle Eastern cultures used ground up flowers of the Pyrethrum chrysanthemum for insect control. This plant and others produce chemicals that could be extracted and used for insect and mite control. These are considered to be naturally occurring organics, the botanicals. Various bacteria and fungi also produce toxins, and these are often called microbial pesticides. We have previously discussed these as bio-based insecticides. At the end of World War II, very potent insecticides were discovered, and these were used to control mosquitoes, flies, fleas, and lice. After the war, these were also used to improve crop production. These are called synthetic organics because the molecules contain carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. While most of these are acute toxicants, hormone-like insect growth regulators were also developed and used. We'll discuss the synthetic organic insecticides first, as these are the most commonly used products. The first ones brought to market after World War II were the organochlorines, organophosphates, and carbamates. DDT is without a doubt the most famous of the organochlorines, which are also known as chlorinated hydrocarbons. These seem to have low human toxicity, yet they killed insects at very low doses, and they lasted a long time in the environment. Eventually, we discovered that these molecules also had long-term adverse environmental effects, and most are no longer available, at least in the United States. Organophosphates and carbamates have the same mode of action that quickly disrupts the insect nervous system. Unfortunately, they are highly toxic to humans and animals too. Again, most of these have been removed from the urban landscape use, and even farm use often requires a license. Pyrethroids are a synthetic version of the botanical pyrethrum, but they have greater and longer residual action. Insect growth regulators are complicated hormone-like molecules that interfere with insect growth and development. Because of their complexity, they are usually very expensive to make. In the mid-1990s, the neonicotinoid category was developed. Based on the botanical insecticide nicotine, they were much more toxic to insects than birds, fish, and mammals. These are some of the major workhorses used by today's landscape managers. The most recent insecticide category are the anthranilic diamides, which target specific insect muscle function. The vast majority of insecticide categories affect how an animal's nervous system functions. Animal nerves use an electrical charge that runs along the nerve axons created by using sodium, potassium, and chlorine atoms. In order for a nerve impulse to be transmitted between nerve cells, chemicals have to carry the message across a synapse. The chemicals involved with this are called neurotransmitters and usually entails acetylcholine. The transmitting nerve releases acetylcholine into the synapse, and the receiving nerve is stimulated by this to fire its electrical charge. Another chemical, acetylcholine esterase, rapidly destroys the acetylcholine so that another message can be transferred. As you can see from this diagram, various pesticides either stimulate or inhibit the various neural processes. Organochlorines and pyrethroids interfere with the sodium and potassium pumps of nerve axons. Organophosphates and carbamates block acetylcholine esterase, so the acetylcholine keeps stimulating the receiving nerves. Neonicotinoids block the nicotinic acetylcholine receptors so that the message can be sent, but it's not received. The newest insecticides, anthranilic diamides, exploit an interesting difference in the way that arthropods use calcium in their muscle contractions. Acelepryn is one of these chemicals. In other animals, including earthworms, birds, fish, reptiles, amphibians, and mammals, the calcium is kept outside of the muscle cells. When a nerve impulse stimulates our muscle cell, the calcium enters the cell and causes the actin and myosin proteins to slide together, that is, contract. The cell then kicks out the calcium and the muscle cell relaxes. In arthropods, the calcium is kept in tiny packets called ryanodine receptors, which are inside the muscle cells. The anthranilic diamides cause these receptors to empty the calcium and not take it back. The result is intensive muscle cramps that don't quickly stop. If young insects have their mouth parts cramped shut, they die rather quickly. Yet older insects may not die that quickly. Soaps and oils are often used to manage crop, tree and shrub insects, and mites. If these molecules come into direct contact with living cells, they break open the cell membrane and the cell will die. Since we have multiple layers of dead cells on our skin, getting these on our skin poses little risk. However, you probably suffered the pain of getting soap in your eye, or while washing out a cut where it is contacting cell membranes, and it burns. Insects have microtubules that connect their epidermal cells to the exoskeleton. So, where soaps and oils contact insect exoskeleton, the molecules travel down these microtubules and can kill the underlying epidermis. In this case, the only way that soaps and oils kill is by direct contact with insect exoskeleton. In short, while most claim that soaps and oils suffocate insects and mites, the reality is that soaps and oils kill epidermal cells. Insecticides are often discussed by the way that they get to a target pest. As just indicated, some insecticides can travel through micropores of the exoskeleton and enter the body. These are called contact insecticides. Others get into the insect's body by being eaten. These are often called stomach poisons. Some insecticides have both methods of delivery. They can be contact poisons if directly sprayed onto the insect, but if their residues are subsequently eaten, they can also be stomach poisons. Some insecticides get into insects through the air, that is, by inhalation. These are rarely used except to fumigate dried, food-infesting pests or termites. Finally, people talk about systemics. Systemics get into the plant tissues and act as stomach poisons when plant parts are eaten or plant sap is extracted. The term systemic insecticide seems rather obvious, but there are several types of systemicity. Let's take some time to explore these types. First, some pesticides can be absorbed into the plant tissues that they contact. This can protect these pesticides from being washed off or being exposed to ultraviolet radiation, which can eliminate their activity. However, these pesticides don't move from these locations. We call this translaminar systemicity. Trans meaning across, laminar meaning membrane. Translocated systemics move from the site of absorption to another location in the plant. Most turf herbicides move from the leaves to the roots, and this downward movement is called basipedal. On the other hand, many insecticides only move up a plant vascular system. This upward movement is called acropedal. To make things more complicated, most neotinics are translaminar in action if you spray them on the plant leaves. However, if you drench the roots with the same insecticide, it can be translocated from the roots to the foliage. Growth, molting, and development of insects is a complicated physiological process that is regulated by several hormones. The most commonly discussed hormones are the molting hormone, ecdysone, and juvenile hormone. In this illustration of the hormone levels found in a developing and molting caterpillar, JH means juvenile hormone, and the ecdysteroid is the ecdysone. When stretch receptors in the exoskeleton stimulate the insect nervous system, ecdysone is produced that initiates the molting process. If juvenile hormone is present in the blood of the insect, the next form of the insect will be a juvenile, either a nymph or a larva. If juvenile hormone is absent, the next stage will be a pupa or an adult insect. Insect growth regulators are chemicals that interfere with the hormonal systems of insects. Some of these chemicals can mimic the hormones, and others inhibit those hormones. Most simply mess up the molting process, either causing the insect to molt before it should, or keeping the insect from being able to harden its new exoskeleton. Others cause the insects to remain immature in form, or cause the insect to transform into the next stage before it should. Insect growth regulators are relatively complex molecules and are rather expensive to produce, but they are very effective at low levels and relatively low in toxicity to animals that do not regularly shed an exoskeleton. Remember that all pesticides are poisons. They are designed to kill their targets, but by their very nature, they can have non-target effects. Non-target effect means just that. They may harm or kill things other than the targets. Obviously, when we use pesticides, we should be aware of the potential adverse effects that these chemicals might have on humans and other animals. The most commonly listed attribute is the toxicity of the chemical or its formulated product when given to rats or mice, another mammal. This is usually stated as the lethal dose that will kill 50% of a population of rats or mice. This is the LD50. LD50s can be administered orally or applied to the skin or dermally. It is measured in milligrams of toxicant to kilograms of animal body weight. That's roughly parts per million. When a chemical is highly toxic, this number is very low. When a chemical is low in toxicity, the number is very high. The U.S. Environmental Protection Agency created 4 categories using these LD50s. Category 1 is highly toxic, and a label will contain danger, poison, and a skull and crossbones symbol. Medium toxicity is Category 2, and such pesticides have warning on the label. Category 3 is called low toxicity, and pesticides will have caution on the label. Category 4 is called practically non-toxic, and products may have caution or they may have no signal word on the label. I want to quickly run through a few former and current insecticides being used for landscape insect management related to their mammalian toxicities. As you can see, most of the organophosphates were either Category 1 or 2 in toxicity. Virtually all of these have been removed from urban landscape use except for acephate and trichlorophon, which is only used for white grub curative treatment. Many of these are now restricted use pesticides and are often only used in field crop production if one has a license. Even if you find old products with labels for ornamental plants, these uses have been canceled and the product will have to be legally disposed of. While most carbamates have also been removed from urban landscape use, like the organophosphates, Carbaryl or 7 is still on the market, even being available in garden centers. The apparent reason for this is not its oral LD50 level, but its dermal LD50. Since this insecticide is not absorbed through the skin, EPA was not worried about the most common exposure that a user would experience, that is, by getting it onto the skin. Many have stated that since the organophosphates and carbamates were largely removed from use, the pyrethroid insecticides must be less toxic. In reality, most are in the medium to low toxicity level. They are also very poorly absorbed through the skin. Pyrethroids are common contact and stomach poisons, but they are very absorptive onto organic surfaces. This is why they can be used to control surface inhabiting insects, but are poor choices for soil inhabiting insects. The neonics were developed in the late 1990s, and EPA welcomed them as a less toxic alternative to organophosphates and carbamates. In general, they are indeed in the low toxicity categories. The other reason for embracing them is that the organophosphates and carbamates were being used at pounds of active ingredient per acre, while most of the neonics were effective at levels of well less than a half pound per acre. Unfortunately, because neonics cause insects to stop behaving normally, it was eventually noticed that honeybees, when exposed to high levels of these insecticides, also didn't behave normally. In essence, if bees picked up the residues of these insecticides in flowers or in pollen, they would lose their ability to fly back to the hives or do their normal tasks. Recent steps have been included on neonic labels to ensure minimizing bee exposure. Basically, these pesticides can't be used on plants that are in bloom. While we're comparing the toxicity of commonly used insecticides, let's take a look at some of the alternative insecticides. Azadirachtin is a botanical insecticide, and you can see that it has a pretty low toxicity level. However, it still isn't in the practically non-toxic category. Spinosans are derived from a soil-dwelling bacterium, so it would be considered to be a microbial pesticide. Again, it has very low toxicity level and approaches the practically non-toxic level. Insecticidal soaps are definitely in the practically non-toxic level, but they only kill on direct contact with the target pest. The latest category of insecticides to be developed are the anthranilic diamides. The first product registered, chlorantraniliprole, is a true Category 4 insecticide, and most products have no signal word on the label. While this has some translocated systemic action, it is best used as a translaminar systemic. Pesticides are rarely used in their pure state. They have to be formulated so that they can be handled safely and will reach their intended targets. Most insecticides are generally sprayed in water, or they may be spread as granules. Most synthetic organic insecticides are liquids or solids at room temperature, and most have relatively low water solubility. Emulsible concentrates are liquids at room temperature but not soluble in water, so they have to be mixed with an emulsifying agent. Emulsions are microscopic droplets of the pesticide suspended in water. If left alone, the pesticide will separate out and float to the water surface. Wettable powders, flowables, and dispersible granules are tiny particles of water-insoluble pesticides that also suspend when put in the water. These can usually settle to the bottom of the tank if not agitated. Soluble powders and granules dissolve in water like sugar or salt. Granules usually come as some kind of carrier, like ground up corn cob, clay particles, or other absorptive substances onto which the insecticide is added. Wetting these granules releases the insecticide. Fertilizers or granular herbicides may also be used to carry insecticides. Applications of these formulations will be covered next.